Well, welcome to the Daniel A. Daniello building, AEI's new home. First time I've been sitting on this podium, anyway. How many people are new to this space? Virtually everybody. Great. This is an amazing building. It was built in 1917 by Stanley McCormick of the McCormick Reaper family. As luxury apartments. They didn't have condos in those days. And all sorts of famous people lived here, including, most notably, Andrew Mellon. It's a National Historic Landmark, and AEI has been renovating it within those preservation limits for the last couple of years. So welcome to our brand new space. So I'm Jim Glassman. I'm a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute's Center for Internet Communications and Technology Policy, which we launched 3 years ago to focus on tech policy in tech policy. We've got 13 fellows, I think, at last count, and we have a blog that I hope you'll visit called Tech Policy Daily, where today Rosalind Layton, who's one of our fellows, actually lives in Denmark, has an excellent piece on a Senate hearing where questions were raised about the FCC's unwillingness or inability to put together a simple national broadband map, a big kind of information question that has some relevance to today's events. Steve Lohr is the latest headliner in a series that we started a few years ago called The Disruptors, which has included such luminaries as Eric Schmidt and Peter Thiel in his pre-Gawker libel suit days. Steve has been a foreign correspondent and editor at the New York Times, and for the past 20 years he's covered technology, business, and economics. He's the author of Go-To, a book about the programmers who created the software revolution, and was part of the team at the New York Times that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2013 for explanatory reporting for a 10-part series on working conditions at tech companies. His new book, Data-ism, examines the economic and social revolution that big data is creating. Should I call it big data or big data? Big data, right, Steve?
I do, but others have and data.
Right? I also noticed in your book
go down this route a long way, actually.
And I also noticed that you use data as a singular.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Another source of debate, but there's I went with the New York Times style, which is kind of can go either way, but we tend to have it singular.
Good. Well, that wasn't actually my first official question.
That's all right.
But this book raises really interesting questions of public policy, philosophy, morality, all the stuff we like here at AEI. So let me start with a question that might have come from the great Brian Lamb. Data-ism is a term that was coined by David Brooks, as you say in your piece. But what is it?
Yeah, I think of what we call data science or big data as essentially three things. I mean, one, it's all the new data that is surrounding us from the web, mobile phones, genomics, and so forth. It is and I'm getting to the end of your ism question, don't worry. And the second thing is this sort of the software tools, mainly from the toolkit of artificial intelligence, that's used for finding patterns in the data, making sense of it for observation. And the third thing is the world that this opens up, and that you can sort of observe and see and predict things about the future based on the combination of the data sources and these clever algorithms from the AI world. And it's that third aspect that suggests it opens the door to different kinds of measurement almost in the same way that the microscope did. Suddenly you could see life down at the cellular level. It changed both medicine and biology. And now we can see and sense things that in a way that we couldn't before. And the final thing that this speaks to is a swing in the pendulum of decision making. That increasingly decisions can be based on data and analysis rather than experience and intuition. And it's that third mindset point of view philosophy that the ism speaks to. And I want to make just a digression in terms of, there's a balance here in all these things. And what we call experience and intuition as best, as a defense of it, is a huge amount of data synthesized by the human brain that you can't attach a crisp number to. And this is the blind spot in the rush for data-driven decision making. It extends the aperture of decision making, but it still has limits.
So let's talk about some specific examples. You and I were just talking about the driverless car. Is that a good example of data?
I mean, it's a small. It's actually, yes and no. I mean, it's from an artificial intelligence standpoint, computer vision is a big part of where people have made gains because of some of this deep learning technology. It's not making decisions in kind of the sense that I've mainly focused on. And what I did in this book really was kind of try to write a narrative field guide to a future we're all increasingly living in, whether we want to or not. And move beyond the Silicon Valley incubators into the sort of the real world of healthcare, transportation. See, it's an $18 trillion economy. If this stuff matters, it's got to get out of Silicon Valley. And that was kind of what I took time off from the New York Times and traveled around and wrote about.
So let's talk about examples that you use in the book. So one is using huge amounts of data to diagnose or maybe predict the course of diseases. You mentioned healthcare.
Yeah, and what in particular there is an adult intensive care ward at Emory in Atlanta, where what they do is you can, I hope you don't have to be an adult intensive care wards anytime soon, but the modern ones, which I hadn't seen before, are it's a room where the person in the center is just surrounded by screens. There's monitors of every way, shape, and form. And the people who are trying to make sense of those are kind of overwhelmed. And so what's been done in a particular research project there is you can read signals to see when somebody is cresting down. And the guy who's in charge of this is also a pilot. His name's Timothy Buckman. And he uses the flight analogy, that what you can see, the flight coordinator can see from the tower is, because of the GPS signal and everything they have on the plane, when a plane is going off trajectory. And you can do the same thing with all the monitoring devices on a patient. You can get that heads up of a few hours to see when somebody is fading before it becomes more visible.
So it's not like the human being has a hard time digesting lots and lots of data, but the data can be sort of boiled down to whatever is really important.
And combine three or four things together in a way that the person reading, the heart monitor, the kidney monitor, whatever it is, wouldn't see in isolation.
What about, you also talk about ag tech. What's going on there?
What they're doing is moving toward the equivalent of personalized medicine for plants. And this is mainly for perennials. And the one that I looked at was, oddly enough, was a Gallo winery in California. And these are perennials, of course, that come back every year. And these are, you can tailor through satellite imaging, ground sensors that you drag along between the vineyards. And there's a lot of change and variation in the ground, even in a particular vineyard. And so what they did is they increased they solved the wine problem. They increased production and improved flavors, based on how they kind of test the flavor result. And that increased 20 or 30%. And then they did that, as they said, with A/B testing. There was a 10-acre one where they did the treatment, the drip irrigation, and the fertilizer tailored to each individual plant, almost. And then a 10-acre one where they didn't. And that's where you get the difference.
And I guess that drones are going to make a big difference now in big data, right? Collecting big data.
Yeah, I mean they're a wonderful sensor, and they're used in agriculture a fair bit these days.
And then what about? And I don't think you don't talk about this in your book, but what about predicting where Zika will go next?
Well, this is Center for Disease Control. It's kind of all over this sort of thing, right? Zika is one, that I haven't followed particularly, but in terms of disease spreads, and where they come from, that the CDC puts together the airline flight maps and other characteristics, and to find out where certain, and particularly certain populations cluster. And so they've done that in the past in a kind of number of cases.
And does the CDC monitor Google searches also?
Well,
I've heard that.
Well, this was, I mean, it's a great example. I mean, because Google Flu was seen as this wonderful predictor at one time, and then you looked at it again, and it went way off the charts the following year, because there were news reports about concerns about flu, so that increased
people
number.
Didn't actually have it.
Number of symptoms. The inferred number of symptoms were much inflated, so they overstated it by kind of 2 or 3 times. But we're kind of we're going back to these things. I mean, there's but it's in those cases it's a combination of the emergency ward actual CDC data plus the flu trends data. And you do that over the search data, and you do that over a number of years, and you come out with a head start.
Mm-hmm. So we hear this term big data. What's the difference between big data and small data?
In the eye of the beholder. I mean, I think big data is it's referred to. I prefer the term data science, but it's among other things, it's a marketing term, and it's the most the amount of data is the big is the least important part in a way. I mean, because you can do these multipliers to thousands fold, right? You can gigafly, you can.
What is the highest number? In bits. I mean, what is it called?
Yeah, it's it's been a while since I've looked at this, but it's that part is less. It's the variety of data that's really more important. I forget.
All right.
Anyway,
somebody will ask about
zettabyte.
Zettabyte.
Zettabyte is pretty close, right? I think that's about it. So.
But I mean, is there sort of a qualitative? Was there a tipping point where we've been able to acquire so much data that it qualitatively changes things?
Yeah, and the web was the forerunner there. I mean, no question about it. And this is, it's also the intriguing thing to me about the applications of this technology in general. There's a point at which quantitative changes become qualitative, and I think of this, the analog is with Moore's law, and it isn't just the transistor density doubles every 18 months or 2 years. It's at some point quantitative changes become qualitative. I mean, it's all ones and zeros to a computer, right? Mm-hmm. So you start out with estimating the trajectory of artillery shells, which was the ENIAC in 1946, and you end up with Toy Story and beyond. Mm-hmm. And it's all, I mean, and that sort of, that shift is kind of crucially involved here, as I think another part of Moore's law is, which is Moore's law is not a law of physics. Like,
right. If
you go below 32, physicists like to talk about state changes, and a lot of people in the data science world who are physicists talk about this. I mean, it's that, it's a law of nature. If water goes below 32 degrees, it freezes, right?
Right.
That is not what happened with Moore's law. I mean, there were sort of physical limits, but it was a function of investment, optimism, and people making it happen time after time. And then, of course, there's a debate about how far it can go now.
So you think if Moore's law had been even big, if the multiplier had been even bigger,
we would have hit it.
It would have hit it.
Good question. I think the investment was about as much as it would have, because it was a business thing.
Okay.
Right?
So why hasn't big data given us more productivity growth?
It's early days yet. I mean, in the same way that, again, it's a broad economy, and in so many of these things, in the same way, I mean, the classic example, and a guy named Paul David, who was both at Oxford and Stanford, wrote about this years ago, and I did stuff. We use the kind of the Bob Solow line, which written in 1984, that computers are everywhere except in the productivity statistics. It's actually buried in the center of a New York Times book review if you look at it. And eventually we got it. But and the analogy that David uses is going back to the electric motor. That is, it was invented in the 19th century, but it is not until you get the organizational innovation, the mass production assembly line, Ford and so forth in 1910, that you really get the acceleration in productivity. And if you believe it's going to happen, that's what you believe. And if you're Bob Gordon of Northwestern, who's basically said we've run out.
He says this is kind of not a very good industrial revolution compared to the other ones.
Right, and this, I mean.
But you think it's more a question of timing?
Yeah, and we're just starting. We're just starting, really. I mean, in terms of, again, $18 trillion economy.
Yeah.
We're just beginning.
And
as we talked before about, and I write about in the book, but even more recently, General Electric is, and we talked about this before, in a piece I did recently for the Times. If you talk to Jeff Immelt, he said, look, General Electric was based on sort of its technical foundations were material science, since the incandescent light bulb, and physics. But the third leg that's going to be added is data analytics, with the information flowing off all these sensors that make it possible to both save energy and do optimizations on things like jet engines and power generators, but in addition to that, change the way you might make the goods. The latest version of the large power generator theirs, which I visited down in Greenville, South Carolina, it took 2.5 years to develop instead of the usual 5. And these are real machines. It weighs 900,000 pounds. It fires up at 2,600 degrees, and one of them can supply the electricity for 500,000 houses in the United States, 800,000 in Europe. So I mean, those are the kinds of gains you're going to start to see, right? But we're just on the cusp of this in sort of the mainstream economy, and we go through a lot of experimentation, good and bad.
So as far as what the future might look like, you talk about in your book the movie Her. How many of you have seen Her? With Scarlett Johansson's voice, anyway. So the future of big data may well look like the movie Her, with Scarlett Johansson as the voice, the dialogue system. And Amazon is I have one of these Alexa things. It doesn't really do very much now. You can say, what's the weather, and that sort of thing. But eventually, artificial intelligence is going to be much more an important part of our lives. And what you say in the book is that the importance of Her is that it's kind of a system that gathers data about you and then helps you make decisions, or maybe makes decisions for you.
Yeah, and this
talk a little bit about
it's
that.
Also it's set in 2025.
Which
the research scientists really like. A guy like Larry Smart on it, UC San Diego. I mean, he loves this one. And without the emotion, you take the emotion out, but it's the logical extension of where we're headed in all this. I mean, that's whether it's search gets more and more like this. Siri at Apple gets better and better, and you can pull more data sources so that this thing is this finally the vision of the intelligent assistant actually sort of comes to pass. And there's a heck of a lot you can do with that. I mean, somebody's covered this. I mean, people have been working on this with all kind of gorpy names like web services way back when. That there'd be this automated information flow, but we've got, and that it would help you in your daily life. And we've finally gotten to the point is in so much in technology, it's not like pharmaceuticals, where the molecule is the invention or one great breakthrough. It's this accumulation of things that come together. And the bet is, and everybody's making it, Google, Microsoft, Amazon in its way, Apple, Baidu in China, are all working on these intelligent agents, and they're startups as well. And that it all is lashing, varied data sources to artificial intelligence algorithms.
And one of your this I think fits into this question. So one of the themes in your book is that it's not the data, it's the people. I mean, the people are using the data. It's the people and the software that manipulate it that count, and that the manipulation is now being done, or maybe more and more will be done, not actually by people, but by artificial intelligence systems.
Yeah. No, and this is.
Are there examples of that already?
Sure. I mean, but this is frankly the danger as well. I mean, most of this, and I think of data science as sort of the first wave of applied artificial intelligence, because you can do it in software only, so it's easier. And that's what these internet firms have done. And you can, so far, most of this technology has, at least from a business standpoint, has been dedicated to increasing the odds of making a sale. Targeted ads, product recommendations, personalized marketing. And now we're moving into things where it's involved in making things that are higher stakes: lending decisions, hiring decisions, medical diagnosis, and crime prevention. And these are ones where the mantra for like online advertising, whatever you think of it, there's plenty to be said that it's nowhere near as efficient as they claim. And research has been done on that. But better on average is plenty good enough for a lot of things, right? Or we don't have to understand why it works. The correlation, good enough. It's an exploitable correlation. There are a whole set of things for which that's okay. As we move into these higher level areas, the stakes are rising, and it can't be a black box, which is to your point, right? The one I kind of use and have written about actually is data lending, and this is because it gets to both sides of this, and this is big new data sources used in credit analysis beyond so-called FICO scores,
right,
which are just essentially your credit.
Very crude, very crude.
Credit history, and now there's a wave of startups that are doing this kind of more elaborate lending, and look, it's the basic principle of banking: know your customer. Well, now you can know them as never before, whether it's social networking, how they fill out forms, and so forth. And the promise is, and particularly for young people, millennials, and immigrants, they have thin credit files, so they're disadvantaged. Or the way FICO has tended to work so far is that you miss one medical payment and it's a real black mark. Your credit rating goes well down, and this is the way to sort of measure this more accurately and price credit more efficiently. And again, it's sort of, you can save millions of people billions of dollars. Now, the other side of it is that these are elaborate systems. And an automated system is making a decision about you, right? And and this is a direct quote from Rajiv Date, who is both an investor in these startups and was on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau board, right? Yet, you have no idea why that was made, and that's very disturbing. And that's kind of, and the answer you get on all of this is storytelling. For this stuff to be acceptable to society and to actually work, it has to tell a story. Its story, not literally, but some traceable, audit trail, if you will, as to how a decision was made about you. And how much of it is human, because a lot of these things are reviewed, and how much of it is purely automated, and why. And that, that's a tough thing to do in this world, and a lot of fine minds are working on it.
So you are, you quote in a slightly different context, Mark Rottenberg of the Electronic Privacy Information Center, talking about actually the example of the person who goes searching for pressure cookers or deep fat fryers, which has a lot of relevance.
May have been David Vladeck, actually, of the FTC.
That's right, Vladeck.
His favorite. And it's
for innocent purposes, then gets flagged, could potentially get flagged, could lose a prospective job or something like that because of this search, right? But you may never know. So Rottenberg says that these algorithms need to be made public. So that maybe the algorithm for credit or the algorithm for the deep fat fryer needs to be made public. You talk about storytelling. Is that what you mean?
Mark would have a different take on this. I mean, making the algorithms public is, huge IP kind of issue, right? Obviously.
Right.
Google would fight this to the end of time.
Right.
But you ought to be able to without actually exposing I think the middle ground people would look for here is without exposing the code itself, show the path and the inputs to an automated decision. Because forcing some of these companies to make it all open source is, although there's another side to this. And just as an aside, I had a recent conversation with Andrew Ng, who was Stanford, ran Google X, Coursera, the online Coursera's, and is now head of AI for Baidu. And he was saying that the protecting the IP algorithm thing may be a lot less than it matters. He said, because I asked him, why do you go to Baidu? And he said, look, there are only a handful of companies that really have this. Your algorithms aren't going to give you an advantage for very long. The two things that will are capital and your data, because nobody can put that together. And this is the other disturbing aspect of this. I mean, most of these are huge, essentially private marketplaces. I mean, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Google Search. It's those are.
So you think of
Facebook. They hold. And have access to data trail and your patterns of online behavior in certain worlds, right? In a way that no one on the outside does, and so it is not kind of open to public review. So that's another thing that I think is.
So you think of Facebook as
vaguely unnerving about.
It's sort of this big pile of data.
I mean, absolutely.
That's what the business is.
Absolutely, and you sort of see the flaws. I mean, your point about the DFAT fryer. I mean, let me just digress on one of this, because one of the things I did in this book was it wasn't Snowden was out. I wasn't going to get into any of that. I've talked to Bart Gellman and doing various tours and stuff. The Washington Post guy who published this. But I did do personal privacy. I felt duty bound to do it.
Right.
There's a company. Called Axiom, which is the largest data broker in the country. It's in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they had the privacy guys. They call it a Big Brother in Little Rock, right? And they collect all this kind of commercial data and put it together. And one of the things they were doing, when people were concerned about how much they had on them, was you could go into a website and put in various things, including your social security number. And they would show you kind of what their read on you was. And so I did that. And I comes back and it says, I'm single. I've been married more than 30 years. And then I'm a gun owner and a gun enthusiast. And I do get mailings from the NRA. And I think it's because I cashed in some frequent flyer miles and pushed Field and Stream. I grew up in Wisconsin. But the last time I did a lot of hunting, did fishing then, not hunting. Last time I shot a gun was with the Secretary of Commerce in Finland, because they all did skeet shooting with the Russians, right? Because this kind of stuff. So he showed me that. That's how they entertain people. But you can say, okay, fine, that's just funny, right? But it's not. If you're my age and you're single, this gets to your deep fat fryer thing. I'm sure your health rating is probably not as good as if you are married, statistically. And you don't. I mean, there's HIPAA requirements and so forth, but you don't really know how that's used, and that's. I'm less concerned in a way that this stuff is so good and when it gets it right than when it gets it wrong. And you don't know about it. I mean, and that's why my one is health club memberships are on a credit card, liquor bills are in cash. I mean, if you put your life on your credit card, you don't care about your privacy. Because if you're doing this for frequent flyer miles and stuff, because there's much more that can be tied to that, and then your cell phone number, which almost everybody has, than your browsing habits online.
Right.
So.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the relevance of big data to government. I mean, are there things that the government should be doing? I mentioned Roz's piece about the FCC not being able to get its act together to just even do a broadband map. They spent $350 million on it so far, apparently. But what can government be doing with big data that they're not doing?
Yeah, and this is, to be honest, I stray into, policy. I mean, Jeff Eisenach here I ran into because of Microsoft antitrust years ago and stuff. So I do, but I'm not based in Washington. I'm not a Washington tech policy person. But you've got to get with the program. And there, to be fair, there all kinds of efforts have been done under administrations, including first time I really got into the health stuff was when in the Bush administration, David Brailer was named the National Information Technology Coordinator for HHS, and that got into electronic health records and all these kinds of things that to sort of set standards and try to move that world online. But I think the open data initiatives are, and I think look, you know more about this than I, but all this kind of, measurement that can be applied to outcomes.
Right.
That is, and this is something that, in the healthcare world, I mean, that's what accountable care is about, right? I mean, people say the American healthcare system is, horribly broken. No, it responds beautifully to the incentives it's given. Fee for service, more of everything. More tests, more, right? More surgeries, more pills. The ideal of the accountable is that you're measuring for outcomes, people healthy. And you see that in the private sector too, and this is exactly where Jeff Immelt of GE is headed. We're moving to an outcomes-based economy, and you can only do that if you can measure it. And this is, measurement and performance criteria. And I know nothing about, the restrictions and the, unions. And, I mean, I don't know how that works out, but I think you've got to be part of this world, and I think for the most part, just the for instance, yesterday the self-driving car regulations sound to me like the kind of right approach. I mean, you have broad guidelines and then play on, as we did with the internet, which is why we've done as well as we have, right?
Yes. Yep. Actually, AEI is now part of something that the Arnold Foundation is funding. The AI, Brookings, and a few other think tanks called the Evidence-Based Policy Collaborative. You know
I'm
about
aware of it, yeah.
And also, I should also have a little commercial for Matt Jensen and Kevin Hassett's Open Source Policy Center, which was started at AEI, maybe it was earlier this year, and it's a lab for predicting the effects of public policy, starting off with this thing called Tax Brain, where anybody can plug in data, sort of tax policy changes, and see the results in the federal budget. So that's an example of something that is, I mean, it's a think tank that's doing it, but it's completely transparent. Anybody can use it. I mean, is that the kind of thing that governments ought to be doing?
This is, well, I mean, the way they've done it is, as I, to the degree that I really understand, is sort of hackathons.
Yeah.
They throw it out there, and this is raw data. Unless you're a real quant, it's going to be tough. But look, this is one where all this data is public. I mean, it was paid for by taxpayers, collected by people who are paid for with government money. There's no argument about this in the same way there is in the stuff in the private sector, right? So it should definitely be raw material for public-spirited people to work with, and policy analysts.
So I have loads more questions, but I want to turn to the audience. And so raise your hand, and someone with a microphone will go find you. This gentleman over here. And just tell us who you are, and keep your questions short.
Thanks. My name is Mark McCarthy. I'm with the Software and Information Industry Association, and thanks very much for this very interesting talk. I wanted to ask a question about the future of work. A lot of people are talking about the robots are going to take our jobs, but it's true that these intelligent systems are getting good enough to do the kind of work that used to be reserved for people. It's not just manufacturing, it's lawyers, it's journalists, it's teachers. What do you think the policy issues are there? It seems pretty clear that there may be a future in which there's a declining amount of human labor in the economy. What should we be thinking about?
It's a broad subject I wish I have written about, actually. So the policy implication would come from what you think is actually happening. And there's a bit of a debate about that. this was 2013. The Oxford economists did this prediction that 47% of American jobs are at risk. 20 years out was their time frame, right? The one I kind of like more recently was done by the McKinsey Global Institute, which looked at, it took 800 occupations, if I recall off the top of my head, and 6,000, at least 2,000 tasks within those. And what they found was that within 5 years, only 4% of American jobs are at risk of being actually automated out of existence. But something like 40% of jobs will be transformed. So, the CEO's job is more automatable than the home healthcare worker, for example. And so and there are other things that kind of are in that because anyway.
Is there a particular CEO you'd like to
somebody in the robots world, they might argue that, because this is really physical labor and you have to do recognition stuff.
Right.
But the history here is clear, right? As we all know, the technology, there's always been from the Luddites on. People complaining about the end of the world as we know it, and yet overall, technology has increased numbers of jobs considerably. And one of the recent ones people kind of like to use, though it may be going away full circle now, is bank tellers. If you do it, and a guy named James Besson at Boston did research on this, that the actual number of bank tellers has gone, actually increased slightly despite ATM machines and everything, because they've now become these kind of consultants and so forth. The job has changed dramatically. So I think I get back to the pace issue. If you think this is the argument is what's different this time is that it's happening faster and it's going up the food chain. And then if you're a real hawk on that front, then you start talking about guaranteed incomes, which are just if you look at the numbers, it's not going to happen, right?
But what about the problem of now? The jobs are changing and they require a higher level of education, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is, you had John Donovan of AT&T here earlier this year, and that's what what was interesting to me is at least in the way it's being presented at AT&T, this is not people aren't off the shelf. We'll get rid of these guys. They aren't replaceable commodities. There's huge kind of training programs with targets and number and projections about how many of this kind of profession within AT&T are going to exist 5 years from now and what you can kind of go for. Because there's no way and even in the labor demand stuff, there are projections on this so-called, data science. Again, it was the McKinsey study done before, but we need, we need 150 to 140, 170,000 people with deep analytic skills. You need 1.5 million managers, getting back to your who are data literate and either retrained or rehired. You're not gonna hire all these people off the shelf. And so it's you have to do some kind of retraining stuff, and then people look to examples. Do you like Germany? Do you right? Denmark?
Do you think we should all learn computer programming? You did, right?
Yeah, basic stuff. I remember. It's funny. I had this conversation. I remember with years ago at Bill Gates at the basement of a place of a room at Harvard, because he was going on the tour. He was trying to get more people involved in computer science, so he's doing this like a political road tour. It was, and that wing of it was MIT, Carnegie Mellon, a couple other places, and we ended up and he said, I got a daughter, and she actually, she went to Vassar. She's a senior now. Even at artsy Vassar, the most difficult general course to get into is Introduction to Computer Science, right? And it's not, and look, you don't learn. It's a little bit like, I don't use it in my Japanese anymore. Mm-hmm. Look, and I struggled with it. I was sent over on an emergency basis for somebody who was fired, actually. So it was 2 mornings a week with language camp, and it was language. And summer vacation was language camp at the Gaimesho, the foreign ministry and stuff. So struggling all the way. But what it did do was gave you an appreciation for the culture. The classic, somebody described the classic, and what a kind of a culture it was, and why their education system makes sense, and all these other things. I think it's the same true as it's good to have people get a sense of playing with code. The notion that sort of everybody's going to be a computer programmer, and it's part of everything is questionable. The other side of it, though, is that the tools are getting better and better and higher level. So it isn't. I think this guy named David Yaffe, who is a good friend at Harvard Business School, and he was saying that a third now of the students, the two-year students at Harvard Business School, have experience as professional programmers, and a far higher percentage of that than that of the undergraduates come out of STEM disciplines. And as he said, it's just a huge transformation in the knowledge base of the population. And I think I just think it's having a familiarity with it. I mean, I don't think you have to become a computer programmer, but having a familiarity with it, is just a useful tool in life in a way that Obama went after art history. I think art history is a great thing, right? History of where it enriches your life, and I think some knowledge and facility and understanding of how this works is going to be a useful tool. Has been for a long time.
Okay, other questions? This gentleman over here.
Hello, I'm Andy Yuan with Tech Freedom. I wanted to ask a question about the third-party doctrine and kind of the effects that big data will have on privacy. So the third-party doctrine, allows the government to access our information that we hand over to third parties. And I was wondering, what kind of policies should be in place once big data can actually not only compile our information, but also make predictive models on, what kind of people we are. What kind of policies should be in place to protect our own privacy?
Yeah, the third-party thing is, you know more about this than I do. I mean, apparently, because I thought, each individual company had their own, policies on what you can hand to third parties or not. I mean, if you sign in for, and the big guys tend to hold on to it for their own purposes, right? But that once it goes out, once it goes out, collecting the data in the initial place, and there are people in the privacy world who think there should have hard curbs on collection, right? The other group says, look, that genie's out of the bottle. What we ought to have, prohibitions is uses, right? But it's in this middleman third-party world, and that's where the data brokers fit in, for example, and both Congress and the FTC have looked pretty hard at that, and now they're going down to individual prosecutions. But is your question, should we have a federal law that prohibits it? Is that what you get? There's all kinds of others. I'm of the view that the individual should have control, assuming there is such a thing as real choice. Because in so many instances, let's just take healthcare, right? It's healthcare for people, particularly with many different conditions, where 75% of our healthcare is spent, right? People have 2 or more chronic conditions, right? It's a team of people that work in different institutions, and we don't have national health care, and it'd be worse if we did, probably. But so we don't. It wouldn't necessarily, as in Britain, it wouldn't help the information flow issue necessarily, right? So I think there are third and fourth parties there, but that should be specified. I think seems to me a blanket prohibition feels like an awfully blunt instrument.
Okay, yes, over here, Matt.
Thank you. My name is Li Yang. Recently, Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, sent a letter to the Department of Justice. She's questioning why FBI released so much information about the Clinton email, but so little information about the financial crisis. They said 2008. So I just wonder, how do you verify that information? Which agency is more trustworthy? Let's say if you think when town A is very safe, there may be a question, but I just wonder any information you can come to conclusion whether law enforcement is trustworthy, whether their information is really reliable, or you think the financial institution or health insurance, they are really just sell you some fraudulent data for millions of dollars without any credibility.
Okay.
You-
No, you want to answer?
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah, they are somewhat separate. You know, there's the transparency of the financial crisis. I mean, they're two kind of separate issues, right? In a way, you know, there's a hard argument to be made about the transparency of the financial system and dark markets and the like. And they've tried to kind of go after this to a degree with tools, but I don't think they've gotten very far. The other one is, you know, an agency and a political process. In case of Mrs. Clinton's emails, right? That this was a public that you could sort of extract information from. You know, I think there's an argument for greater uniformity of disclosure.
Right. So, I mean, there's this point about how different agencies are release different amounts of information, right?
Yeah, and then you also had the question of how trustworthy these are, right? I mean,
Right.
sort of if they're, you know, how.
I think that's too big a subject to explore,
And it's
even in the big data realm.
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
But very good question. Thank
It
you.
is a
So
good question.
let's see.
Particularly
Some
on the financial side.
more questions. We need. We got lots of hands here. Matt, just you.
Something that comes up a lot.
Oh,
in the
could
big-
you identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, Evan from Tech Freedom. Something that comes up a
and
lot.
2 Tech Freedom people.
Yeah.
I don't know. That may be too much.
Just met right now.
Oh, you just. There's so many Tech Freedom people that you don't
Yeah,
even
all
know
7
each
of
other.
us.
Okay.
So something that comes up in the big data conversation a lot is discrimination. And you've seen the FTC warn about this. There's 2 ways of looking at it. You can see it as a bad thing, or you can see that maybe some discrimination in big data could be good for the customer, a better experience. What do you think the policy angle should be there, given that there are concerns about what ads a low-income person sees versus a high-income person, or whether ads are being tailored a certain way and whether people are being discriminated against that harms them? I mean, who should be dealing with that? Should that be a case-by-case FTC? Should there be bright-line rules against how the data are used? What do you think?
The FTC has defaulted to case by case. Having talked to them this morning, it's a little bit different. The advertising one is a little iffy, I think, because it is a little a little fuzzier than the hard one of discrimination by statistical inference, right? Which is, although the ad one gets close, right? Because the offers and the world that you see, this is the filter bubble argument, right? The offers and the world that you see is determined by who they think you are. And you may be, algorithms are brittle. You are a far more diverse person than that, right? I think it's case by case, but I also think we have protected, and I say that because we have protected classes. You know more of this than I do probably, but we have protected classes of people, right? And for particular kinds of things, we have healthcare, we have financial Fair Credit Reporting Act stuff, right? So we have those, and we have minorities, right? And so I think you make noise in general. You do research and disclose, and you handle it on a case-by-case basis.
Back there.
James Sang, IBM retired. I appreciated your reference that big data results without a narrative are either not very good or can be very dangerous. We're very good at making narratives. So how do we know, in fact, that big data results support only one particular narrative, or that, for example, there are not other equilibria or close by points that would support radically different narratives? How can we guarantee ourselves that we don't fall into traps like that?
Yeah, and look, you're talking about in this world, there's always a pattern, and so there's much more latitude for mischief for the classic, biased fact-finding mission. I know the facts, now let's find them, right? In the storytelling, I was looking at more of not, the broad, we're making up a tale based on the thing, but that you can follow, sort of step by step how a particular decision was made. But I mean, your general point is, and everybody is statistical on this, is, all false positives. There's, and you get into, it's not just in this world, but in larger sets of data. I mean, the reproducibility of scientific research. A guy named James Ioannidis at Stanford has done a lot of this, where 60 or 70% of them weren't. Mm-hmm. So it's a more generic, it's a general problem that gets worse in this world.
I'll just say that the inability of Washington policymakers to deal with fan charts rather than points.
Yeah, no,
But I didn't you deal with what? I'm sorry.
Fan charts rather than points. This is Charles Mansky, always beating CBO. Charles Mansky is a very distinguished Northwestern economist, and he has pointed out that the Bank of England, for example, uses fan charts for its projections, but CBO, because Congress wants points, only use points. And a much more realistic view of what you know about the future is in fan charts rather than points.
Right.
And big data makes that tendency much worse, I think.
It makes it much worse? I don't know. Is it, would it? Why? A fan chart, as I understand it, shows that there are different possibilities, right? Okay.
Big data generally, somebody says that this is the optimal solution.
But big data only tells one story.
You have to push them as to what how some optimal other solutions are.
Mm-hmm.
And how, as he said, statistics, you have to look at statistics in detail.
Do you want to comment on that?
no,
Okay. So there was something I wanted to get to before we ended. So your book is kind of built around a person and a corporation, and we touched on the person earlier, but I'd like you to elaborate because he's such a fascinating guy. Jeffrey Hammerbacher, is that how you pronounce his name?
yeah.
Who's now the head of a data group at Mount Sinai Hospital. Tell us about his odyssey.
Yeah, and as I said, I tried to make this a narrative. So I did one young man and one old company, and the old company was IBM. And these are mostly, proof of concept science stuff as opposed to their mainstream business. And so that was, the agriculture one is the research one, for example. But I wanted somebody to kind of give you a sense of the mindset and the trajectory of the technologies. And so this Jeff is the son of an auto worker in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and a nurse. He goes to Harvard actually on a kind of essentially almost washes out, but on partly academic, partly on a baseball scholarship. It really got him in actually.
And he washed out like so many others.
He did, and then he came back, of course. And he found out at Harvard they let you back after a year, but you got to do something else. But living at home and working at some of the local places put the fire of the Lord into him. So, anyways, he applies. He's an applied math major at Harvard, and and then he does what most people in kind of those years of early 2000 would have done. He went to, as he said, his career is following the smartest people in search of the best problems. And so, the conduit out of Harvard was to Wall Street, and he became a quant for a year. And he said this is, making these complex statistical models and stuff was a bad use of quantitative skills. So he then goes to Silicon Valley and joins up with a couple of classmates that he knew, and a little startup at the time called Facebook. And he starts the data team there. And so he decides after love the people, love the work, but decides really, after 3 years, social networks and ad targeting are not, best uses of his skills. So
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
So he says that the best minds of my generation are thinking about how to get people to click ads, which
Yeah. He said that after and he's, to be honest, he's fair about Facebook. They've done a lot for the world. They're pretty open to research. He's okay on that front. But then he is a co-founder of a startup called Cloudera, which makes these tools for this big data world, which he is still a chief scientist of. And then he decides he gets looking elsewhere, and he decides that healthcare is sort of the best use of his skills. And so he's got this and he is about to turn 33. So and his trajectory from because Wall's quant Wall Street, Silicon Valley, mainstream industry, healthcare is the trajectory I wanted to. And so he was generous with his time, and I met him, talked to his parents and his wife, and so he's an interesting guy, and he's also fought bipolar problems. So there's a whole kind of mental health side to this kind of as well, which he's seems to have conquered. So and he's doing stuff. To be totally candid, he's still at Mount Sinai, but he's also working on doing separate research on oncology. And he's got, I think, his little shop is in Union Square, and it's called Hammer Lab. And it's a bunch of quants working on medical and therapeutic challenges.
So do you think there is a problem, though, that he raises, that you've got these computer programming geniuses working at Uber, et cetera? Nothing wrong with Uber. We love Uber.
Well, yeah, I mean, Uber can make it.
As opposed to, healthcare research institutes and places like that. In other words, it seems like that there are a lot of really talented people who've been attracted by social media and other things that people might not consider to be
it's
more than trivial.
Yeah, no, it's been the best petri dish kind of for some of this stuff for a while, right? And you get, and I think we're getting is one of the people I quote. It's a real rocket scientist in this world named Claudia Perlich, who was at IBM Yorktown Research and is now in an ad targeting firm. And her line to me a couple of years ago, to be fair, though she's still there, is that it's a great time to practice data science in this world, because if my algorithm is wrong, what happens? Somebody sees the wrong ad. It's not a false positive for breast cancer. And that's, so these skills are honed, and I think you're seeing more and more of these people kind of come out in the real world. Also, frankly, there is no economic uncertainty in their lives. I mean, I'm not just talking, Hammerbacker is probably worth 30, 40 million just selling in private shares of what he took out, but he didn't wait for the IPO, so he bailed out early. But and his big money is going to come with Cloudera. But I'm not talking about that so much. But everybody who is his peer, who I know, and worked with him, these people, I mean, you do what they want to do because they'll always make a good living, if not a killing, right? So, and I think you can get more and more. I mentioned before the people who like these guys who have left Apple, who were part of the Siri founding team, which, again, a DARPA-funded project called Kalo was the origin of all that, have come out, and they were the infrastructure team at Apple for all of their cloud-based stuff, which would have been Siri and iTunes and everything else. And they're working at GE now, and in San Ramon, California, because they'd rather work on transportation, healthcare, power generation, energy consumption. I mean, the problem set sort of attracts them, and we've finally moved to the stage where their skills can be applied in these other domains. I mean, it's to be fair about the underlying technology for things like the stuff I made fun of, right? Online advertising, personalized marketing, and so forth. That's fundamentally the same as the agriculture example, the fine-tuning of your power generator. It is, precision marketing and precision medicine are closely related. So but big institutions and the rest of the economy takes a while to absorb this, and so it's it is a problem, but I think the market will work itself out.
That's a great way to end an AI session, that's for sure. So thank you, Steve Lohr, and thank you, audience. It's been really fascinating. Really appreciate it. Thanks.